Nietzsche on Nasdaq.
Welcome to my channel, Nietzsche on Nasdaq, where, as a college professor, I use the philosophy taught in the humanities to analyze trends in capitalism and the culture of companies for possible investment. Since this is my very first episode, the big pilot, I thought I'd begin with my own origin story on how what my father before me and what I early on in my own young adult life borrowed from liberal academia to become very successful long-term investors. Of course, since this is brand new, please do take a moment to subscribe. It will help make such videos possible and reachable to you. Now, typically we think of this kind of theory in academia as turning students into Marxists. Part of what I intend to show here is that there isn't anything so inherently wrong with the course material, so much as the way liberal academics dogmatically insist on relating to it. As someone from both sides, a tenured professor in the humanities as well as an investor in the stock market, I want to briefly get to the crux of a real problem. Consider a very difficult scholar all of my colleagues would know, the contemporary Marxist theorist Frederick Jameson. A famous quote from him proves quite instructive. Capitalism is the worst and the best thing to happen to humanity. So as a Marxist, he's obviously concerned with the exploitation of workers, reducing all of life to a money relation, etc. But also, as a Marxist, he's highlighting capitalism's dynamic creativity, its innovation, its transformation of societies, its inevitability. Okay, for Jameson, as for Marx, the prose proves so strong that he theorizes inevitably at some time in the future it will collapse and we'll have communism. But I wonder about that with good precedent. Are we aware that one of the most modern amazing feats in civilization is how communist China lifted a whole generation, hundreds of millions of people, out of poverty through capitalism? Like a great Hegelian, able to see both sides, much better than our current average liberal academic professor, Deng Xiaoping, in deciding whether to stay more authoritarian socialist or go more authoritarian capitalist, famously reasoned, white cat, black cat, both catch the mouse. But academics don't do that kind of dialectical reasoning, at least not anymore. I started this channel as a forum beyond the classrooms and seminars of American higher education, where I dare say we can't have much true reasoned discussion. Considering that the first half of Jameson's claim, capitalism as a bad thing, has gotten all the coverage, I want to really look at what's great about capitalism, more specifically, the successful American companies that emerged through it using Marx. And if I haven't yet shocked and awed those who know me as a liberal scholar and writer, up to this point secretly reading the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg in my downtime, I interject a particularly strong claim. A big part of Nietzsche, referenced in the title of my channel, who I'll unpack in future episodes, is about subverting authority, turning power upside down. So in the spirit of Nietzsche, I say this: like Marx before them, the convenient weaponization of hating on such a successful model as capitalism has made liberal academics long-suffering and rather pathetic victims. Even, as I now might add, they especially benefit from the very system they critique. One of my favorite hypocrisies in recent New York City history was tenured professors from Columbia University and the students from that institution going to occupy Wall Street. Are we aware that the prosperity upon which that institution is predicated is the very thing they're attempting to overthrow? And if you don't buy that argument, then explain the current failure of the Democratic Party, which simultaneously thrives upon the very system it seems intent on taking down. One of the real rock stars of leftist thinking, the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, perfectly captures the hypocrisy. As a self-admitted communist, he playfully but sincerely admits to flying first class, saying, yes, of course, he too is waiting for the revolution, but there's no need to suffer in the meantime. I mean, theorists love to retroactively apply thinkers from the past to our time. And if we're really doing that, I just wonder about Marx in the 21st century. He was so intrigued, truly fascinated, enraptured with capitalism, to the point of making it his real religion. I dare say he'd park himself in front of CNBC today while day trading on Robinhood. Okay, with that rant out of the way, I want to briefly introduce this channel with my family's free market origin story. The greatest gift my immigrant father gave me growing up was teaching me about investing. He never once threw the baseball with me, but we'd spend days in grocery stores and restaurants as he'd do his own empirical market research. He was old school too, learning about Benjamin Graham and Warren Buffett when he first came to this country from the Middle East for college. But his biggest long-term investment that became his legacy didn't just come from Graham and Buffett. It originates with the sociology class he took as a freshman at Illinois State University. In the early 1960s, get this, a professor teaching about how the efficient model of industrialization continues to proliferate into all sectors of American society, this professor wants to show his undergraduates a real-life example. He actually takes my father's class on a field trip. This is a liberal sociology class, mind you, predicated on leftist thinking. Like, who would do this today? So he takes them to a new kind of restaurant spreading like wildfire via an innovative franchise model throughout the Midwest. You may have heard of this company. It's still around today. It's called, wait for it, McDonald's. My father rightfully realized this company as a perfect long-term investment. For him, it embodied 20th century America at its best. Clean, consistent, efficient, fast, and ever expanding. My awesome, future-looking, economically savvy parents, who knew how to save as well as invest, living on my mother's salary as a teacher, they invested what my father made, also as an educator, in MCD, continuing to buy shares for as low as $1. On long road trips in his big Buick throughout America, my sister Mary and I seriously had to salute every time we saw the Golden Arches. To this day, we still do. My wife and I were traveling in Europe recently with our older son, and we passed a Mickey D's, almost involuntarily, my hand just goes up. And my wife was like, seriously, still with the salute? And I'm like, yeah, it's the family legacy. So a big part of my origin story goes back to my wise parents. It's a testament to value investing, along with the simple yet often neglected art of paying basic attention, like the great investor Peter Lynch advises. But looking at cultural trends through different philosophical perspectives can lead to even more informed choices. Theory supplements and amplifies Peter Lynch's advice of paying attention, showing what best deserves our focus. Sociology, predicated a lot on Marxist thought, helped my father find his American dream. That is the real work of theory in application. It's absolutely not just pointing at economic prosperity and calling it evil. Nor, for that matter, is it unconditional acceptance of unbridled capitalism. It's interrogation, but dialectical interrogation. But again, if we're only telling or teaching half of the story, we don't have the dialectic. We can't just label it categorically bad. Boy, if we do, we're missing out on a lot of what still makes this country special, also missing out on a lot of personal profit and potential for creativity, innovation. Many of my working class students at my commuter college where I teach, something like 40% of them are below the poverty line, they tend to understand the value of analyzing free enterprise more than those fancy pants schools. Not because they want to hate on it. They want to understand it because they want to belong to it. Well, my personal origin story comes as a kind of part two to my father's college years. My frugal father didn't support me at my state school. He had his reasons. My single mother helped with tuition. I got Pell Grants. Also, I worked for a while, work study, also at a Wendy's drive-thru, the formative years. But when I got my degree from the University of Texas in philosophy and sociology, my father did give me $10,000. That was a lot of money for him to part with. He gave it to me on the condition that I invested all of it in one company of my choosing. And I had to promise him I'd hold the investment over the long term. Well, what an awesome responsibility at such a thrilling time. This is 1993, on the cusp of the Clinton years, a glorious time for the stock market. Again, the simplicity of Peter Lynch's advice of noticing new companies impacting your own life came through for me. But I wouldn't have had the success I did without the kind of theoretical analysis that I want to teach on this channel. There was a store, only one, selling good-for-you groceries, one block down from my street in Austin, Texas. The hippie boyfriend of my platonic roommate loved working there, since employees got to be a part of the decision-making. Like the customers, he also liked, feeling he belonged to a new kind of almost spiritual ethos around self-care. When this company, Whole Foods, went public at $17 a share, it seemed like way too much. But I really had made it my choice, so I watched it. Then, after some very influential analysts cast a lot of doubt on its model, it fell to 10. I bought 1,000 shares. It's easy to look back and say, why wouldn't you buy a company like that? But most everyone at the time, especially the gurus on Wall Street, said it wouldn't work. Members of my own family, including my father, by the way, always long on Kroger, they didn't see how or why someone would be willing to pay so much more for a tomato. But here's where I really use Marx, which I studied at the University of Texas. There was an emerging culture, a bougie, feel-good, do-good culture that saw something in that tomato. That tomato is considered a commodity. Connecting Marx to Peter Lynch as far as identifying cultural trends, I really got to thinking of this famous quote on what Marx calls commodity fetishism. This is a material historicist, by the way, believing all of humanity can be reduced to the material world, Marx does. And he's writing about commodities as something almost spiritual, shamanistic. Here's the quote. I know it gets a little difficult, but part of the work of teaching theory is to simplify. So bear with me. I promise it becomes a big claim that's actually easy to unpack. So he says this: a commodity appears at first sight a very trivial thing and easily understood. Its analysis shows that it is in reality a very queer thing, something abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. So far as it is a value in use, there is nothing mysterious about it, whether we consider it from the point of view that by its properties it is capable of satisfying human wants, or from the point that those properties are the product of human labor. It is clear as noonday that man, by his industry, changes the forms of the materials furnished by nature in such a way as to make them useful. The form of wood, for instance, is altered by making a table out of it. But here is where he gets subversive. Yet for all of that, the table continues to be that common everyday thing, wood. But so soon as it steps forth as a commodity, it is changed into something transcendent. This is an atheist, right? It is changed into something transcendent. It not only stands with its feet on the ground, but in relation to all other commodities, it stands on its head and evolves out of its wooden brain grotesque ideas. So now the table has a brain, far more wonderful than table turning ever was. Now for Marx, a commodity takes on a metaphysical dimension because it embodies social relations that appear as relation between things. You think you just get the table, but really you're getting a relation between people. You just can't really see that. It's the hidden labor that informs that commodity and the other social forces that imbue it with power. Marx is assuming, in his time, most of the time, probably rightfully so, that labor is disenfranchised, right? That labor is left out. But now keep this in mind though. Wait just a minute. My roommate's hippy-dippy boyfriend loved being a part of that labor, right? And he belonged to that store. Where's the oppression? And that local organic farmer, for what it's worth, he loved growing tomatoes and getting paid handsomely for them. So in a broader view of that organic tomato, Whole Foods wasn't just selling the commodity itself. We're going back to Marx. Here is the big Marxist brilliance, which to understand it means to really get to the spirit of capitalism. Whole Foods wasn't just selling a tomato. It was selling an ideology. A way to understand this is by asking, do you really think a certain kind of guy just buys the big truck because he has big stuff to haul? Or on the other side of that truck, that the ethical Whole Foods shopping academic just happens to buy a Subaru Outback because it's just the safe car? Of course not. To wrap up here, my more recent investment success, much bigger than Whole Foods, that builds on Marx's reading of a commodity, came near the end of my PhD program. I was finishing my doctoral dissertation, living back in New York City with my wife, when I got my first real career job as a full-time substitute professor at a community college. I had an incredibly brilliant dissertation advisor, really into film. The great difficult theorists, you have to analyze film because they make it difficult. So it always interested me that on his office door, he only had one image. It was one of the early Apple ads with, of course, Alfred Hitchcock. There's something quite outlier about this ad, think different, connected to Hitchcock, who's also an outlier. And that outsiderness, it did captures something about this company. It especially, that outsiderness, captured something about its returning CEO, Steve Jobs. Back then, few believed Jobs would do much of anything with his return to Apple. The deflated share price kind of proved that, right? But in this ad, I thought a lot about the late Canadian media theorist Marshall McLuhan, also 20th century. He famously said, "The medium is the message." So I'm thinking commodity, but I'm also thinking Marshall McLuhan, right? What it means for a particular medium to be selling. So how true that's been in modern times. The medium is the message. Just think of the Kennedy-Nixon debate, very famous, where the young Kennedy commanded the medium of television like he's been born to it, as poor Nixon, looked so painfully uncomfortable, sweating, hiding himself. And now also, 21st century, think of Trump's command of the phone. I'm always struck by that moment in his first Republican primary back in the 2016 election. I think it was in New Hampshire. He hadn't even won the Republican Party. He keeps Ted Koppel, who's like the last real journalist in America, waiting for a long time for a brief interview. Then finally, Ted Koppel is granted like 15 minutes. And when Koppel walks in, Trump is holding his phone up, telling him, "I don't need you people anymore, right? I'm my own journalist." So the medium is the message. Well, back in my PhD program, we didn't have cell phones yet, but something was happening with the computer. We did have the internet, and we had computers. Well, I had a bad toothache, and I went to a dentist who also taught at Columbia University's dental school. He showed me a few of his patented inventions on a Big Mac. And oh my God, that pun is not intentional. Like, this is just what happened here. So talking about the Big Mac, right? We went from McDonald's to Apple all in one episode, and we had a little spontaneous poetry, just pointing that out. So I asked this accomplished dentist about his computer. How do you like it? Why did you buy a Mac? He replies, "Well, say what you want about Apple. It will always be around in the medical community." He says it just does imaging so well and it's so user-friendly. That same week, my wife, just starting her career as a graphic designer, bought a big, giant new Mac desktop. So again, going back to Marx and the commodity, there was something transcendent about these products. Some, if you remember, even look like candy. The first one, which I had, my wife had passed on to me, really basic. It's actually in the Museum of Modern Art now, right? So is the commodity just a commodity? It's imbued with this kind of aura. Well, I received my last student loan check of $5,000 when I got news of this new full-time teaching job. I actually started with the envelope. I was going to send the check back to the loan company, giving myself at least $5,000 less of debt. But instead, I bought Apple at $22 a share before any split. This was before the iPod, by the way. And like Whole Foods, I can't stress this enough, most analysts, the majority, were far from bullish on this bet. And I have to be honest, there was obviously some intuition in the decision too. Should I be afraid to say that? Since the commodity has transcendent wonder, and since recently I even heard Jeff Bezos in a talk say, yes, all the fundamentals matter, but even as a CEO, there has to be some intuition. I think it's okay to invite that into the mix. But here's the big point of this episode, along with the ones to follow on this channel. And we do look at all kinds of philosophers. Intuition matters, but it's informed intuition. My older sister, who saw her as a young person, still saluting McDonald's, she's had a successful career on Wall Street. And she counts as one of her favorite quotes Louis Pasteur: "In the fields of observation, chance favors only the prepared mind." That's the how and the why of theory. It's not so much, oh, I read Marx and now I'll crush the market like, Professor Sederat. It's a way of thinking dialectically with healthy cynicism along with a certain kind of creativity. You have to be trained for it. You have to practice it. You'd think academia would do this, but I don't see it doing it so much anymore. I long for it. My God, did we not see in that earlier quote? Marx turned the tables really on himself and on us, right? So yeah, of course, I wasn't entirely sure about the 5K bet on Apple, but when I first started to see the cool kids on the New York subways with those white buds in their ears, I knew I had a multi-bagger, right? So knowing like me now, mostly we take the iPhone for granted. We take everything for granted. Well, when we stop and reflect upon it, I think we have to agree, to quote Marx, it abounds in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. If he was like amazed, it's like with a telegraph coming, right? Like the fact that I could talk to my friend in the Middle East just instantaneously. My God, there's more computer power in this. It's an older model, like a 12. than all the computer they used to send the American astronauts to the moon. And now the addition of AI, it's commodity on a lot of steroids. What we can do with it, unlimited, really. So that's episode 1, my pilot. Please, again, take a moment to hit the subscribe button and like this video. I plan on posting only once a week, since, I still have a day job as a college professor until they come and get me because I'm outed myself as a capitalist investor. So in episodes to follow, we'll look at new possibilities, introducing other approaches using cultural theory, yes, Nietzschean philosophy, to assess companies and current trends, from value investments to crypto. I'm really looking forward to bringing more your way. I love doing this kind of thing. I'd also love to hear your comments after you view what I'm offering. So thanks for joining me, and tune in for another episode.